Thank you so much again for attending our workshop again. Today, we're going to talk about mostly data analytical approaches. And in qualitative part, I am going to just cover the most basic general principle, but I think all the application is basically following these master principle. And I think for quantitative part, Johnson is also going to cover some of the really critical question when you are going to conduct your data analysis. So, Johnson, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Jiang Chong. I am from Quantitative Methodology. So I'm going to, later on after payroll, I'm going to introduce some of the critical concerns if you're going to, at some point, doing quantitative analysis of your data.
Okay, cool. So, yep, I'm Perong, and I'm the qualitative consultant for our service. And let's get started. And we always start with these recap because I know some of the people couldn't attend the previous workshop. So this is what we have from the previous workshop. Basically, we cover from the beginning to right now when you should expect when you are conducting a research. So basically, we all start with exploring our research area or research interest upon our entry into our program. And this could be done during the course-taking or when you immerse in your field. And then we come to the stages where you narrow down your research topic, and this could always be done by literature review. I know a lot of people don't find it helpful or really hate literature review, but I personally later on found the value of it because it really helps you to figure out what has been done, what are the gaps, and then kind of helps you to build your arguments from there. And also you could do this by taking minor courses, which through course taking, again, you are narrowing things down, working with your colleagues or working on some of the project your mentors have. And later on, you will start with selecting or developing your research questions. And then you we suggest for each research question, you really closely think about what kind of methods or what kind of information you need to answer that question, so to develop your research methods. And then here we are going to talk about what analytical approach. No, today we're not going to talk about that. We already talked about that. The analytical approaches that could connect your research data, methodology, and your research questions. So today we're kind of going to talk about the very general principle of data analysis. And so for all these, what I've mentioned, we have the recording uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back to watch those, here's the playlist. So here we are going to start with the general principle of qualitative data analysis. So what counts as qualitative data? Broadly speaking, I define it as any non-numerical data. So some of the most common one are text. So a lot of people do interviews, so you have transcript, or you may do literature review or systematic literature review that also count as kind of a research that also are text-based data, but also recording, which you don't really have to transcribe that. You could directly also analyzing those recording. So for example, documentary, also objects. Some people they are right now currently applying art-based research. So some of them create objects, and so people could also analyze them. And same with the images or photos, like one of the approaches photo voice, which people would have photos. And right now, some people are also doing in art-based kind of research. So they will have theater performance being used and shown as part of their results. So these could all be counted as qualitative data. So let's start with a question. True or false? Do you think researchers can produce the same result from the same set of data? I invite you to share your thoughts right now to using chat, or if you want to speak up, you could always speak up But before answering this question, let's do a really quick exercise. So how would you categorize these fruits? So let's spend probably 2-3 minutes, and you could send your answers in the chat, like how you would categorize them. Okay, Austin say probably by color. Could you specify is that what kind of colors? Like the skin color or the fruit meat, or could you share a little bit more? And maybe give us an example, like maybe you could present one group of the color that and what fruits you would put into that group, maybe. Like red fruits categories. Okay. Acidic fruit and not okay. So by flavor. So which one would you place into the sour one? Like what is your cutting point? Because sometimes the sourness um, could be pretty subjective.
Can I talk?
Yeah, sure.
I really thought quite biologically, actually, maybe the acidic ones is defined, the fruits defined as an acidic fruit, like fruits are acidic, grapefruits are acidic, pineapple is acidic, but and I didn't mention the taste.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for a misunderstanding. Okay, so it's biologically, so
Yeah.
you will have a clear distinguish in
Yeah.
that way. Cool. Nice, thank you. So now we have color, we have acidic. What else could you think of how to categorize this?
You could categorize them by like those that are grown in the US versus those that are grown in other countries, or I guess more accessible, because granted, like not all of our bananas or oranges are grown in the US, but we think of those as being like the fruits that come from our area versus like something like a star fruit. I don't know that those are grown in the US, or like things even like kiwi or grapefruit. I would think, or dragon fruit, for example, I would think are not native to the United States. Not that really any of them probably are, but aren't naturalized in the United States, I guess.
Yep. Okay, so that is also another really great criteria to group them, like based on maybe the commonality of these fruits being grown, or typically, for example, the temperature. These groups could be like these fruits could be grown. Awesome. So yes. So with these fruits, we have multiple ways to think about. So exterior color, their skin color, fruit meat colors, and their shapes, or like just said earlier, area of the it's usually ground. Or if somebody is a nutritionist, they may probably think about the major nutrition, seeds or not, or layer species. So these are all different ways to categorize these foods. So what we were doing earlier, first of all, we were grouping them. And then second of all, we are finding the pattern across these fruits. So when grouping them, we are finding the pattern of, for example, their colors, or we are finding patterns of their shapes. So some fruits, their skin colors are red-ish, and some of them are like brownish or yellowish. So there are some patterns there. So that's kind of major principles of doing qualitative research. That what we are doing is finding patterns. And we are finding patterns within or across our data. So within the data is, for example, you have a 1 hour interview with somebody, or you have a 1 hour video, and you want to understand, for example, somebody, how they think about sport. And so you're trying to find a pattern of these people consistently talking about or thinking about sport. So you may look through your transcript, and then you may probably try to capture whenever these people talked about sport, how they think about sport. And also, you could also do this finding patterns across cases or across participants. So let's say if you have 20 participants and they are all from IU and they are all undergraduate students. So you want to, in general, answer the research question, how IU undergraduate students in general think about sports? So whenever these participants they talks about sport, you try to capture these, right? Like in the term people use very commonly is try to code them, right? And so you try to capture these concepts, and you try to find if there are any commonality across different participants. So in general, you could generate a conclusion. In general, IU undergrad students think about sport in terms of blah, blah, blah. And also, of course, you also want to report some of the uniqueness in your data. You don't just want to report the commonality. If there's something that is really unique, but that it stands out from your data, and not only one person talk about that, like a lot of people also talk about that, but previous theory didn't talk about that, then that is great contribution you are making to academia, that you find something new. So let's come back to this question. So can researcher produce the same result from the same set of data? From what we were doing earlier, we see multiple criteria we could do. So I would say maybe yes for most of for some of the quantitative research, but especially for qualitative research, it really matters in terms of your theoretical framework. It relates to your research interests or focuses. Like earlier, if you are like a geologist or a biologist, when you look at the group of the fruits, you may probably try to group them based on their species. If you're a non-expert but you just like fruit, probably you will group them by their colors. And also methodologies too. If you are taking a more critical approaches, and you may probably do it differently from if you are taking a more let's say conventional, but if you are more toward positivism, like you believe in things should follow this way, then you may probably also analyze your data differently. And of course, also analytical approaches, you may all probably be overwhelmed by all these different terms you've heard about, or different methods you've heard about: conversation analysis, discourse analysis, narrative inquiries, thematic analysis, grounded theory, and so on and so forth. So all these based on these different approaches, which it refers to or relates to your methodological assumption, it also change how you will analyze or approach or process your data. And of course, also your familiarity to your data and participants. For example, while I'm working on my dissertation, I am friends with some of the participants actually, and we have been friends for so many years. So while I was analyzing data, I found even though we were talking similar, while I was asking similar questions, the way I understand the data is slightly, or not say pretty different, but I could feel the things that I could easily understand my friend, quote unquote, when she's talking about this experience, because I already have all the background knowledge and information. I could have less of the thinking or struggle trying to understand or trying to capture what else information I need compared to a participant I just met for the first time. And whoever's talking about a similar story, I may probably need more information and need to process that more. So it also kind of matters to how you are familiar with your data and also how well you know about your participant. So the issue is if we don't all produce the same result, how are we going to know our analysis is accountable? Many of you have heard about these terms. These terms, of course, qualitative scholars have thinking about them very differently based on their their theoretical framework. Sorry, I see a chatting here. Okay, no problem. So validity, here I'm going from the most traditional definition. So validity traditionally is being defined as how accurate your your data is being measured, right? So if you are really capturing the things you want to understand. So in qualitative result, like it's mostly true when especially very rigorous developed when you are doing quantitative approaches, when especially for example you are developing a quantitative survey, and so you have a series of process to examine whether or not the validity of your survey or your measurement tools is accurate enough, whether or not it's really measuring the things you want to measure. For example, the feeling, emotions, or their attitude towards something. And similarly, qualitative may have some related issue with this, like so when you are doing interview with your participants and you already have something you want to understand, for example, their attitude about sports. But if most of your questions are not related to sport, then of course you are not capturing the things that you really want to understand in that way. But however, in qualitative research, when we talk about validity, which I'm going to jump in a little bit further later, is how we think about or what we can do when we are analyzing data. And reliability is the consistency of measurement. So this concept doesn't really apply that much to qualitative research, in my own opinion, because even you're asking the same question, who asked this question, when you asking this question, the tone you ask the question, your relationship with your participant would all shape, or even how your participant feels that day, will all shape what kind of answer you will get. And it's very significantly very different from taking a survey, even though we also acknowledge people's responses to survey may be slightly different too, but it's a very different story too in qualitative research. So talking about validity in qualitative research, there are a few ways, again, like I said earlier, based on qualitative researchers, their epistemological beliefs or their methodological assumptions. So some people would count more on whether the report is logically grounded or the accuracy of data representation. And of course, these two are the basic and what we want to see in your academic writing. But also, if people are taking on the more critical approaches, they may also try to engage themselves and see the degree of reflexivity and reaching, or the degree of emancipatory that is being reached through their research project. So for example, people would, some critical scholars, they may really, we all know the positionality practice, but some people would make that really explicit in their writing too, which sort kind of to ground how the readers read their manuscript. And for example, for the participatory action research or action research, these kind of action-based approaches, the validity would also relate to whether or not the result or action leads to or really address the real concerns. So some of the techniques you may probably heard about, including thick description, which has always oftentimes been used in ethnography, and especially for observation. So you try to, instead of saying, for example, this is a water bottle, you're trying to say this is a stainless water bottle with what kind of color or maybe paint. You will see the paint kind of peeled here, and you try to describe in a way that even your reader is not there, they could still imagine what this water bottle looks like. So that is the description. And of course, you also heard about triangulation. If you have multiple data sources, you try to match them and cross-checking them and make sure that your argument is valid. And also peer debriefing. You could show your interpretation to your peers or your advisor, seeking for a suggestion and checking any intentional or like possible unaware assumption, or not say bias, but multiple ways of interpretation, let's say. And of course, member checking. If you have a really good relationship with your participant, or if you still keep the contact information of your participant, it is strongly to encourage that you could send either the transcript back or your manuscript, or even just your initial analysis back to your participant and ask them for any feedback. So that is kind of to check whether or not they feel your interpretation is really stays to what they originally think. So those are some of the approaches that you could think about in validity in qualitative research. So here I'm going to transition to Jiang Chong. Jiang Chong, are you ready?
Yes. So I'm just going to give you some of the brief introduction of quantitative analysis. Because when it goes to data analysis, really depends on first what type of research question and what type of data you have, and second, how far you will go with quant analysis. For example, are you going to present descriptive statistic only, or you're going to use some statistical modeling method to make inferences based on your sample data, meaning you would hope to that the results from the sample analysis can to some degree generalize to a larger population. So the particular decision will determine what method you will use and how you're going to integrate your results in your summaries. So the important consideration, of course, first thing is, what is the research question? What are the research questions? If you're going to make a if you're going to conduct inferential statistical analysis, then meaning you probably need to translate your research question into a statistical hypothesis, because different from descriptive statistic, where you simply compute some of the very obvious statistics from your sample, for example, the mean value, standard deviation, and minimum and maximum mode, some of the popular ones. But when it goes to inferential statistic, your intent to test a hypothesis, and based on the results to make your statistical conclusion, then in that way, you will need to translate your research question into a statistical hypothesis so that you can decide which tests are suitable to answer that type of question or to test that particular hypothesis. And second, what are the relevant variables? Meaning whatever statistical method you end up use, you will know what are the variables will be used in the model or in the test. And then by determining maybe all or just the several of the relevant variables, you're going to check out what are the scale of these variables, meaning are they continuous variable or categorical variable? If it's continuous variable, what are the distributions? If they are categorical variables, what are the relevant levels? And by having that, you will, of course, summarize the characteristics of these variables. Meaning, even though you're doing inferential statistic, you will also report descriptive statistics of your current sample. Depending on what type of variable you are, you will choose different ways for descriptive statistical summary. Like, for example, you're going to report different statistics, and you can choose different graph methods for different type of variables. And for inferential statistic, another concern is what are the decision criteria for making statistical conclusions? Very commonly, you will see people are making statistical conclusions based on the p-value. They say, oh, whether the p-value is smaller than 0.05, then meaning it's a significant result or not. That meaning when you refer to 0.05, you're choosing an alpha as 0.05, but people can use different alphas too, depends on the particular context or particular research question. But if you're choosing a different alpha, you probably will reach different conclusion, right? Because the cutoff for the decision criteria differs. And if you're using some other indices, meaning there are some other statistical indices that are not rely on p-values. For example, if you're comparing model fit using either AIC or BIC, there is no p-value associated. Then you're going to follow some of the conventional guidelines which are widely accepted in empirical study. Then you will let people know what are those guidelines which you refer to for your conclusions. And some examples. So these are maybe kind of commonly used, popular methods of doing inferential statistic. So for example, normally if you're going to test for difference in the mean values, you can do either one sample, two sample, or pair sample t-test. So these are just different type of t-test, but in general, a t-test is used for comparing whether the two mean values are same or not. And again, that if you're going to test for the mean values between different groups, meaning in addition to the mean values you're testing, they're within the data, there may be some grouping criteria you want to compare with. Then you can use ANOVA or several variants of ANOVA and ANCOVA or MANOVA. They are all about comparing means with respect to different groups, but they're adding more terms like covariance or more predictors. Another very popular method is we so-called the regression. So regression used for making predictions based on the associations between independent and dependent variables. So for regression, in a social science research, mostly people use simple or multiple linear regression. So simple regression, meaning you just have one independent and one dependent variable. And multiple regression, meaning you have multiple independent, but still you have one dependent variable. And the linear regression, meaning you're assuming all the association between your variables, they should have linear rather than non-linear regression. Then if you want to end up with analyze non-linear regression, then you're going to jump into the generalized linear regression, meaning we allow for polynomial association between your variables. For example, logistic regression, meaning that's this method is applicable when your dependent variable is not a continuous measure, rather is a categorical. Very common case is the yes and no. Then meaning you're predicting a probability of your dependent variable to be one case or the other. And the other type of methods using is analysis of latent variables, meaning at this time, whatever variable it's not it's not an observed variable in your data. Rather, this is the underlying variable based on, so in your data, you only have all the observed variable, but those are all the predictors. And the dependent variable y is not observed in your data. So you're going to use this method to analyze that so-called latent variable. The commonly seen methods are the factor analysis. It can be exploratory or confirmatory factor analysis. Or the structural equation modeling actually is an extended version of factor analysis. It incorporates a structure association between the latent variables. And there are also some other more advanced considerations to account for complex structure of your data. For example, you can think about multi-level model if your data have certain type of nested structure. And also you can think about longitudinal model, which is applicable for panel data, meaning you have repeated measures of your variables. For example, you're measuring whatever targets every year continually for 5 or 6 or 10 years. Then you have this repeated measure. So for this type of data, a longitudinal can be an option. Another will be autocorrelated case, which is not quite widely used in social science, depends on the field, but this is by seeing each of the cases, they're dependent on an earlier cases of itself. It is very common in economics and finance, like in stock price or whatever. But these are kind of more advanced methods, but they're all based on a regression, but adding more constraints depends on the particular research question and also the structure of your data. Next page, please. So to summarize, for doing quantitative analysis, the first thing to decide is to choose most appropriate modeling methods based on your best knowledge of your research questions and the data. So these two knowledge are the very fundamental knowledge of your decision, because all the selection of models of the tests are derived based on the particular question you want to answer and the feature of your data, whether the data is applicable to the modeling method you're choosing to use. And the second concern is kind of more practical. It's choose the methods that you're most familiar with so that you can confidently interpret the results in the context of your study. So for example, from the previous page, I've introduced so many different types of models. Sometimes people can, just say, oh, this sounds like a very new or very fancy method. I see some other people in their own study, they use this method. It seems, quite fancy. I want to use it too. I said, yes, but unless you are quite familiar with it and you are very sure that you know every piece of it, you know how to interpret the results, you understand all the information you get, then you can use it. Don't use a method because it seems good from other people's study. So meaning actually the methods or the models, there is not a so-called priori model, like a very cool, very good model or worse model. They're just a tool. The best tool is the tool that works best for you. It's not saying you're choosing a very conventional, simple or basic method, you won't have a good results. That's not the case. You would rather go with the method that is suitable and you know it well, and it can answer the particular research question in the most effective way, and you can speak your results in the context of your own story. So that's mostly the concern for the quantitative analysis. And because quantitative analysis without a data, it's very difficult for us to demonstrate with examples, because you need to have a data and then you work with the data to have some illustratable examples. But if you do want to have your data at hand and you want to perform some quantitative analysis of your data, you're welcome to reach out and make appointment with me. I'm glad to discuss with you more about your own project.